Have you ever met someone who seemed almost too perfect? They walked into a room, and within minutes, people were laughing at their jokes, hanging on their every word, trusting them with secrets they hadn't even told their closest friends. They looked confident, intelligent, calm under pressure, the kind of person you instinctively wanted on your side. But months later, everyone who got close to them told the same story. I don't know what happened. They completely changed. I don't even recognize myself anymore. It's tempting to believe monsters announce themselves, that dangerous people wear obvious warning signs. But the most dangerous personalities rarely arrive with anger or threats. They arrive with a smile. Psychologists have spent decades studying a disturbing cluster of personality traits known as the dark triad. 3 characteristics that, when combined, create people who can be extraordinarily persuasive, emotionally detached, and relentlessly self-serving. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. Most people hear those words and imagine serial killers, dictators, or infamous criminals. But that's not where the real story begins. The real story begins in your office, your classroom, your friend group, sometimes even your family. The unsettling truth is that people high in these traits often blend into society remarkably well. Many never commit violent crimes. Many become executives, influencers, politicians, entrepreneurs, or simply the person everyone seems to admire. Because the dark triad isn't about wearing black clothes or speaking in a sinister voice. It's about how someone sees other people. To most of us, another human being is an entire universe. Someone with fears, hopes, memories, and emotions just as vivid as our own. To someone high in dark triad traits, other people can become something very different. Pieces on a chessboard. Useful when they move in the right direction, disposable when they don't. That difference changes everything. Imagine you're playing a game of chess. You're not emotionally attached to the knight. If sacrificing it gives you a better position, you do it without hesitation.
Now, imagine someone quietly applying that same logic to real human relationships. Friends become opportunities. Romance becomes leverage. Kindness becomes a tool. Trust becomes a shortcut. And guilt? Guilt becomes an obstacle to efficiency. That doesn't mean every narcissist, psychopath, or Machiavellian thinker behaves identically. The dark triad isn't a single personality. It's 3 overlapping patterns that often reinforce one another, like gears in the same machine. Let's start with narcissism. Most people misunderstand narcissism because they mistake confidence for it. Real confidence doesn't need constant applause. A confident person can lose an argument without feeling destroyed. They can admit mistakes, celebrate someone else's success, learn, grow. Narcissism is different. At its core lies an incredibly fragile self-image, wrapped in layers of superiority. Imagine building a magnificent palace on top of thin ice. From a distance, it looks magnificent. Inside, every footstep feels dangerous. Every criticism becomes an earthquake. Every disagreement threatens collapse. That's why many narcissistic people constantly seek admiration. Compliments don't simply make them feel good. They temporarily hold the palace together. Without validation, cracks begin to appear. This is why praise feels like oxygen. Not because they're strong, because underneath the performance, many fear they're not enough. Ironically, some of the loudest egos hide the deepest insecurity. History offers fascinating examples.
Many powerful leaders surrounded themselves with people who never challenged them. Not because they wanted honest advice, because disagreement felt unbearable.
Reality itself had to bend around their self-image. Eventually, this creates a dangerous feedback loop. If everyone around you only tells you what you want to hear, you stop seeing reality. You begin seeing only your reflection. Then comes Machiavellianism. If narcissism asks, how can everyone admire me? Machiavellianism asks, how can everyone be useful to me? Named after the Renaissance diplomat Niccolo Machiavelli, this trait revolves around strategic manipulation, patience, planning, calculation. Unlike impulsive personalities, Machiavellian thinkers often play incredibly long games. They don't need to win today. They're willing to wait months, sometimes years. Think about a spider. It doesn't chase flies across the forest. It builds the web. Then it waits. Every thread is carefully placed. Every movement appears effortless. By the time the fly realizes something is wrong, the outcome was decided long before it arrived. People high in Machiavellianism often think this way socially. They study people. They notice insecurities, ambitions, friendships, conflicts. Not because they're curious, because information is power. They know who dislikes whom, who wants recognition, who feels lonely, who craves approval. And once they understand the map, they begin moving pieces almost invisibly. The frightening part isn't manipulation itself. Everyone manipulates a little. Children cry differently depending on which parent they're asking. Friends soften their tone before requesting a favor. Job applicants highlight their strengths. Human interaction naturally involves influence. The difference lies in intention. Healthy influence respects another person's autonomy. Manipulation quietly removes it. One seeks agreement, the other engineers it. Imagine someone who always seems coincidentally present during important conversations, who somehow knows everyone's secrets, who never appears emotional during conflict, who remains strangely calm while everyone else argues. Sometimes that's emotional maturity. Sometimes it's someone observing the storm because they quietly created the weather. Then there's psychopathy, perhaps the most misunderstood member of the dark triad. Hollywood portrays psychopaths as bloodthirsty murderers. Reality is much stranger. Psychopathy primarily involves emotional detachment, reduced empathy, fearlessness, shallow emotional responses. Researchers have found that many people high in psychopathic traits don't necessarily experience fear the way most people do. Imagine driving a car with a dashboard where the warning lights barely work. The engine may be overheating, the brakes may be failing, but the signals never fully appear. For most people, anxiety acts like that warning system. Before making a terrible decision, fear whispers, "Don't." Psychopathic personalities often hear that whisper much more quietly. This can make them remarkably calm during emergencies, decisive under pressure, unshaken during chaos. These qualities can even appear admirable. Firefighters, soldiers, emergency surgeons. Many professions benefit from emotional control. But without empathy balancing that fearlessness, the same traits become dangerous. Because if guilt barely registers and fear barely registers, what exactly stops someone from crossing moral lines? For most people, morality isn't enforced by laws. It's enforced internally. You imagine how someone else would feel. You picture their pain. That emotional simulation changes your decision before you ever act. Psychopathy weakens that simulation. It's not always that they can't understand another person's emotions. Many understand them exceptionally well. They simply don't experience those emotions as their own.
Think of watching someone break their leg in a movie. You understand it hurts. You know it's painful. but you don't actually feel the pain inside your own body. Some people high in psychopathic traits experience other people's suffering in a surprisingly similar way. Intellectually understood, emotionally distant. And that's where something unsettling begins to happen. Because when you combine narcissism's hunger for admiration with Machiavellian strategy and psychopathic emotional detachment, you don't simply get someone who's selfish. You get someone who can become extraordinarily persuasive while feeling remarkably little internal resistance to using other people as stepping stones. The most unsettling part is that many of them don't see themselves as villains. Every story has a hero, even the darkest ones. And inside their own minds, they're often simply doing what everyone else is too afraid, too weak, or too honest to do. Only there is one difference. Most people wrestle with an invisible judge inside their own minds. Before they lie, they hesitate. Before they betray someone, they justify it. Before they hurt another person, they feel the weight of what they're about to do. That inner conflict is exhausting, but it's also what keeps societies functioning. It's the quiet voice that says, just because you can, doesn't mean you should. For someone high in dark triad traits, that voice can be dramatically quieter. Not necessarily absent, just easier to ignore. And when your internal brakes are weaker than everyone else's, the world starts to look very different. Imagine entering every conversation believing one simple thing. Everyone wants something. Everyone has a weakness.
Everyone has a price. If you truly believed that, every interaction would become a puzzle waiting to be solved. Not a relationship. Not a friendship. A puzzle. Psychologists sometimes describe this as an instrumental view of other people. Instead of seeing people as ends in themselves, they become means to an end. That's why many individuals high in these traits can seem incredibly charming during first impressions. Charm, in this context, isn't always genuine warmth. It's precision. They instinctively adjust their personality to match the person standing in front of them. Around ambitious people, they become ambitious. Around intellectuals, they become thoughtful.
Around artists, they suddenly appreciate creativity. Around vulnerable people, they become reassuring. At first, it feels like chemistry. Later, it feels like confusion. Because eventually, you begin asking yourself a strange question. Who are they, really? The answer may be unsettling. Sometimes there isn't a stable version underneath. Sometimes the personality you met was simply the version most useful for that moment. Researchers call this impression management. We all do it to some degree. You're probably more formal during a job interview than when you're joking with friends. That's normal. The difference is authenticity. Healthy people adjust their presentation. Manipulative people may adjust their identity. And identity is surprisingly easy to imitate. Think about how quickly people mirror each other. Someone smiles, you smile back. Someone speaks softly, your voice lowers. Someone crosses their arms, minutes later, you do the same without noticing. Psychologists call this mirroring, and in healthy relationships, it helps people feel connected. But in the hands of someone who understands human behavior, mirroring can become a shortcut to trust. You begin thinking, they're just like me. Maybe they are.
Maybe they simply learned that looking like you is the fastest way to lower your guard. This is one reason intelligent people are not immune to manipulation. In fact, intelligence sometimes creates a different vulnerability. Highly intelligent people often believe they're too smart to be deceived. That confidence becomes its own blind spot.
The greatest illusion isn't believing everyone is lying. It's believing you could always tell. History repeatedly reminds us that entire populations have followed charismatic leaders into catastrophic decisions, not because millions suddenly became unintelligent, because human beings are social creatures before they are rational creatures. We like certainty, confidence, simple answers to complicated questions. Someone who speaks with complete conviction can feel more trustworthy than someone who honestly admits uncertainty, even when they're completely wrong. This reveals another uncomfortable truth. Confidence and competence are not the same thing.
Our brains often confuse them. A person who hesitates may actually know more. A person who never hesitates may simply never question themselves. The dark triad often exploits this shortcut. People assume confidence equals authority. Authority becomes influence. Influence becomes power. Power becomes permission. And once someone gains enough permission, questioning them starts to feel uncomfortable. This is where manipulation becomes almost invisible. Rarely does it happen through dramatic speeches. It happens through tiny adjustments. One conversation, one compliment, one favor, one carefully planted doubt.
One subtle attempt to isolate someone from people who challenge the narrative. The changes are so small that each one feels reasonable. Until one day, you look back and wonder how you ended up somewhere you never intended to go. Psychologists sometimes compare this to boiling water. If you throw someone into boiling water, they'll immediately try to escape. But if the temperature rises slowly enough, the danger becomes difficult to notice. Manipulation often follows that same rhythm. Not because people are weak, because gradual change feels natural. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is surprisingly simple. Who benefits if I believe this? That question interrupts automatic thinking. It forces you to examine incentives rather than appearances, because appearances can be manufactured. Intentions are harder to fake over time. Eventually, patterns emerge. Someone who always turns every success into proof of their superiority. Someone who never sincerely apologizes. Someone who somehow becomes the victim in every story. Someone whose kindness disappears the moment it no longer produces a reward. These patterns matter more than isolated moments. Anyone can have a bad day. Anyone can act selfishly. Psychology is about enduring tendencies, not single actions. This is why experts avoid casually labeling people as narcissists or psychopaths. These words describe complex personality dimensions, not insults. Most people possess small amounts of these traits. In certain situations, a little narcissism can increase confidence. A little fearlessness can improve performance under pressure. Strategic thinking can prevent people from taking advantage of you. The traits themselves are not the entire problem. The problem is balance. Empathy without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice. Confidence without humility becomes arrogance. Ambition without conscience becomes exploitation. Every personality trait, when pushed to an extreme, begins solving one problem by creating 10 others. Perhaps that's the most fascinating lesson hidden inside the dark triad. It isn't a story about monsters. It's a story about imbalance. About what happens when intelligence loses compassion, when confidence loses humility, when strategy loses morality. The human mind is capable of extraordinary brilliance. It can compose symphonies, discover new galaxies, decode the language of life itself. But the very same mind can also become astonishingly skilled at rationalizing almost anything. History's darkest chapters were rarely written by people who believed they were evil. Most believed they were justified, necessary, even righteous. That realization should make us less interested in asking, who are the bad people?
and far more interested in asking what conditions allow ordinary people to drift toward these patterns. Because the line separating healthy ambition from exploitation is thinner than we'd like to believe. The dark triad is fascinating not because it reveals a different species of human being. It reveals possibilities that exist, to varying degrees, within human nature itself. The real defense isn't learning how to out-manipulate manipulators. It's developing the habits they struggle to imitate consistently. Humility, self-awareness, curiosity,
The willingness to admit you're wrong. The courage to apologize without excuses. The ability to celebrate another person's success without feeling diminished by it. Those qualities rarely attract headlines. They're quiet, almost invisible. But they create something the dark triad never truly can. Trust. Real trust cannot be stolen. It cannot be engineered forever. It cannot survive on charm alone. It grows slowly through consistency, honesty, and genuine concern for other people. Someone can imitate those qualities for weeks, sometimes months, occasionally even years. But eventually, every mask becomes heavy. Every performance slips. Every carefully crafted illusion collides with reality. And when it does, the question is no longer whether someone seemed powerful. The question is whether they left behind fear or respect. Because fear can control people for a while. Respect can inspire them for a lifetime. And that may be the greatest difference between those who seek power over others and those who seek to become someone truly worth following.